Welcome to The Explainer. We are jumping right into the fascinating world of medical research today. Have you ever read a headline claiming, say, coffee makes you live longer? Or maybe a certain everyday chemical causes illness and wondered, how do scientists actually figure that out? Well, today's breakdown is based on a masterclass presentation by Dr. Abhijit Nair. He's a consultant anesthesiologist at Abra Hospital in Oman, and he brings just an incredible wealth of expertise to this. He holds an MD, a PDCC, an IDRA, and a diploma in clinical research. Dr. Nair has essentially broken down the complete architecture of how we observe the medical world, and we're going to explore exactly how it's all done.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of observational studies, we have a clear, step-by-step agenda today. Number 1, meet the expert and basics. 2, cohort studies, over time. 3, case control, looking backward. 4, cross-sectional, a snapshot. 5, measuring risk and odds. And finally, 6, proper planning and reporting.
Section 1, meet the expert and basics, setting the stage. So, in medical research, the absolute gold standard is generally considered the randomized controlled trial, or RCT. You've probably heard of them. This is where researchers randomly assign patients to get either a treatment or a placebo. That randomization is frankly magical because it naturally balances out all those hidden variables between the two groups. But here's the massive problem we run into. We can't always randomize human subjects. For ethical or practical reasons, you literally can't take a group of people and randomly force half of them to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day for 10 years just to see what happens, right? That's exactly where observational studies step in. In these studies, researchers don't control the interventions at all. They just observe subjects in their natural, everyday state. But, and this is a big but, because we lack that magical randomization, doing the analysis requires incredible care.
Now we absolutely have to introduce the ultimate villain of observational research, the confounder. A confounder is basically a hidden variable that's associated with both the exposure and the outcome. And if you are careful, it will completely distort the relationship you're trying to study. Think of it like this. If you find a statistical link between carrying a lighter in your pocket and getting lung cancer, well, the confounder there is smoking. Since we don't have randomization to balance out these tricky variables for us, controlling for confounders analytically is absolutely crucial. It's make or break for the study.
Moving on to Section 2, cohort studies, over time.
Let's talk about our first major bucket. A cohort study takes groups of people defined by a specific characteristic, maybe they all work in the exact same factory or they all share a very specific diet, and then it just follows them over time to see whether an outcome of interest actually occurs. Because you start with the exposure first and then literally wait for the outcome to happen, it gives us very strong evidence of a temporal relationship. You know for a fact exactly what came first.
And this brilliantly illustrates how a cohort study actually flows. We start with a population of interest. Before the onset of the study, we split them into two clear groups, the exposed subjects and the unexposed controls. And then, we just let the clock tick. We follow them chronologically, moving forward in time, simply waiting to see who develops the outcome or disease and who doesn't.
We call this a prospective cohort because we're looking forward into the future, kind of like peering through a giant telescope. It's awesome because it allows investigators to find brand new cases, what we call incidents, and track multiple different outcomes over a long period, sometimes 10 years or more. But yeah, there is a catch. Following thousands of people for a decade carries a heavy, heavy disadvantage. It requires massive sample sizes, people constantly drop out or get lost to follow-up, and honestly, it is incredibly expensive to run.
All right, Section 3, case control, looking backward. In a case control study, we completely flip the script. We actually start at the end. We begin with the outcome already present. These are our cases, meaning subjects who already have the disease. Then we compare them to controls, who are subjects without the disease. Once we have our two groups locked in, we look backward. We basically act as time-traveling detectives, digging through their histories to figure out what their past exposures were.
So the crucial point here is identifying the absolute correct control group. If your controls don't accurately represent the population your cases actually came from, your whole study just falls apart. Now, increasing the number of controls per case, like moving from a 1-to-1 ratio up to a 1-to-4 ratio, that actually improves your statistical power and precision, which is great when cases of a disease are rare. But keep this in mind. A 1-to-4 ratio is really the maximum recommended. Beyond 4 controls per case, the statistical efficiency gains basically vanish. You're just making your study larger and more complicated for absolutely no added benefit.
To quickly summarize the case-control trade-offs, on the plus side, they are relatively inexpensive.
way faster than waiting decades for a cohort study to finish. And they are the absolute ideal design for studying super rare diseases. But on the downside, because we're looking backward, we have to rely heavily on human memory or past medical records, and that inevitably introduces what we call recall bias. Plus, because we didn't get to observe the entire time course from exposure to disease, our ability to confidently interpret a direct, causal relationship is pretty limited. Which brings us to Section 4, cross-sectional, a snapshot. In our third bucket, we have the cross-sectional study. Here, the investigator measures both the outcome and the exposures in the study participants at the exact same time. There's no looking forward into the future, and there's no looking backward into the past. We're hitting the pause button entirely. It's exactly like taking a single high-resolution photograph of a population to assess the prevalence of diseases or exposures right in that specific moment. To really anchor this concept, think of that classic Homer Simpson moment observing a fascinating cross-section of humanity. That's exactly what this is. A cross-sectional study gives us a fast, inexpensive snapshot of a highly heterogeneous population. It's absolutely perfect for large population-based surveys and public health planning. Like if you want to know what percentage of a major city currently has hypertension today, you use a cross-sectional design. However, because you're measuring exposure and outcomes simultaneously, it is really difficult to prove any definitive causal relationships.
Let's move to Section 5, measuring risk and odds.
Let's talk math for a second. Remember cohort studies where we track people over time? Well, because we are tracking the actual incidence of new cases developing, we can calculate a true risk ratio. You just divide the incidence of the disease among the exposed group by the incidence among the non-exposed group. Keeping the interpretation super simple here, a risk ratio of exactly 1 means the exposure has no effect at all, a risk ratio greater than 1 means the exposure is harmful, and a risk ratio less than 1 means the exposure is actually protective.
Now let's see how this builds when we shift to case control studies. In a case control study, remember, we already artificially chose the number of cases and controls at the start, so we actually don't know the true underlying incidence in the wider population. Because of this, we mathematically cannot calculate a risk ratio. Instead, we use an odds ratio. An odds ratio tells us how strongly an exposure is related to a disease state by comparing the relative odds that a case was exposed versus the odds that a control was exposed. While risk and odds are mathematically different animals, it's worth noting that when investigating very rare diseases, the odds ratio actually becomes a really close, reliable approximation of the relative risk.
And finally, Section 6, proper planning and reporting. So, before gathering a single piece of data, researchers must calculate their required sample size, and this depends entirely on which of our 3 taxonomy buckets the study falls into. A cross-sectional study's sample size is based on expected prevalence. A case control is based on odds, and a cohort is based on risks. Dr. Nair really emphasizes utilizing software like OpenEpi, GPower, or RStudio to do this math. And honestly, more importantly always seeking the help of a dedicated biostatistician right from the very start. Finally, when all the hard work is done and it's time to publish, researchers rely on the STROBE statement. STROBE stands for Strengthening the Reporting of Observational Studies in Epidemiology. It is essentially the ultimate 22-item checklist. It guarantees that your final paper is completely transparent, clearly outlining the exact study design, actively addressing potential bias, explaining exactly how the study size was arrived at, and detailing the statistical methods used to control those pesky confounders we talked about earlier.
To wrap up all this core content, here is our master taxonomy. As you digest this explainer, I really want you to mentally file observational studies by their relationship with time. It makes it so much easier. Are the researchers defining exposures and journeying forward over time to find incidence? That's a cohort, and it gives you a risk ratio. Are they starting with sick patients and looking backward through their history? That's a case control, giving you an odds ratio. Or are they just pausing time entirely to take a snapshot of a population today? That's a cross-sectional study, giving you prevalence.
Armed with Dr. Nair's framework, you now have a seriously powerful lens for evaluating everyday medical news. So next time you're scrolling and read a dramatic health headline claiming some wild new link between a lifestyle habit and a disease, I challenge you to pause and ask yourself, how did they actually get this data? Was it just a momentary snapshot, a memory-reliant look backward, or a meticulously tracked journey forward? Understanding these distinctions is the absolute key to spotting the crucial difference between mere correlation and actual causation. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.